Welcome to the Resonate podcast with Aideen. I'm Aideen Riada, and I'd love to introduce you to my guest, Rick Killian, who's going to be talking to us about finding your voice through the written word. Rick is a 3-time New York Times bestselling ghostwriter and publishing coach. He and his wife, Melissa, work together, and they love guiding thought leaders on the adventure of turning their ideas into books that make a real difference in the world. Rick, I'd love to hear how you got started as a ghostwriter. I believe you were working in the editing world and something happened that propelled you into it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how it always happens. I taught school for several years, high school and middle school, and always loved writing. So I got into editing with a small publishing house. And of course, we had success. We had a successful book. And so what happened was our parent company sold us. So I ended up working with all of the editors from our old house to transition them into the new house. And what happens is your editors, they come back to you with something not to edit. They come back with the idea that, well, now I have an idea for a title. Would you just write it for me? And so that transition happens just about that fast.
Wow. Did you enjoy ghostwriting more than editing? What's the difference from your perspective?
There's a lot of similarities when you talk about developmental editing, someone who comes alongside somebody at the beginning of their process, which is a lot of what I got to do as a publishing person, as a publishing editor. So the transition to that is just kind of, you have to get into their head a little bit more and kind of become them, find their voice, and take that on and start writing from their perspective. And so there's a little bit more of an involvement with developmental editing. You can kind of be a little bit distant and a little bit more like, you need to do this, you need to do that. So it's a little bit smoother to do the ghostwriting because you can just do it.
You have more control over it.
Yeah, you do. And you also have more responsibility to them and their message to make sure that you're really getting it right. So it's a lot of fun to do that. Sit in with somebody and get into their head and do it.
I was interested in having you come on the show because of this connection to finding your voice and, having a message. Because my ethos is that whether you're singing or you're speaking or you have your own business, that each of us brings a unique perspective, unique experience together, that when we share it, it has a unique impact. And I know that the written word, and I love writing myself, and I have my one little self-help book that I wrote called Discover Your True Value, because finding your value was, understanding that each of us has value, each of us have a message that has value is so important to me. So when you were speaking at my last Voice Summit, I really felt that it would be useful for people to hear from you, whether they know that they have a message, whether they have a business and they're trying to promote themselves, or whether they just have a story, a life story that perhaps could be useful to others. And so what I would be wondering is, when can someone, believe in the value of writing a book? Like, do you have to have some major big life event like, a near-death experience? Or what kind of, ingredients do you need for the recipe for a good book?
I think the biggest one is curiosity. Along with all those unique things you say, everybody has a unique brilliance. They see the world in a way that nobody else does. And I think there's a kind of a belief that people have that if the universe sort of gives you a book, that it's going to be a bestseller. But I find that writing's nothing about, that's all secondary to what really writing can do for a person and do with it. You get to learn so much. There's something that happens when you put something down on paper. I think artists have the same way. People who draw, people who do photography probably a little bit less. But there's something that when you get an idea out of your brain, you begin to find what's underneath it. So there's a process of like discovering your own unique genius. and then being able to put it down on paper, and then being able to go out and investigate what have other people in the world said in the past about this? What have the ancient philosophers said about this? What did this best-selling author say about that? And you start to find yourself in perspective with the world around you. And then you start to find out what you really do have to offer other people. So book writing and writing just in general, I mean, I think people know this who just journal, realize this to a certain point. But then to write a book is to kind of spend a long time thinking about a really big idea that you're really curious about, that you really care about, and then putting it into a linear format that other people can understand. So a lot of people, times I tell people that until they get their first draft done, they don't even really understand what their idea is. That's the first time that they've laid out all the pieces on the board, and they can start to see what the puzzle really looks like to be able to put it together. Mm. And that's a powerful process. And that's kind of why I switched from just, I started as a teacher, got into editing, got into ghostwriting because people didn't want to take the time to write the book themselves anymore or have me walk it through it. And then kind of got back into coaching and publishing coaching and writing coaching because I realized when I write a book for somebody, it takes away from them what they could have learned on their own, that experience of writing. So we got back into the coaching, not because it makes us more money, but because, and it doesn't, but because it helps people so much to see their story. They're a different person at the end of the writing process than they are at the beginning.
I like that idea that there's a value to the journey, not just to the end goal.
There definitely is. In fact, I tell a lot of people that even if they never sell a book, having written it is just so incredibly valuable. And then everything after that's just a bonus.
Beautiful. I know that, having written a little book and, it's not something that I've marketed hugely, but the people who have a copy that say that it feels like me, that it makes them, you feel happy, that it gives them joy. And that really makes a difference. I think we all have, there's so much connection between us, and we forget this. I think most people forget that they have people in their life that actually like them, right? If you don't talk to the people who like you for a few weeks, you don't know they like you anymore. And, during COVID, everybody was in their separate camps. We weren't really connecting. But, my book is a nice way for me to have something I can connect with people. They can have a little piece of me, and it's a way for me to pass that on and even give them to people as a bonus, as part of, working with me as a coach or anything like that. What's the most interesting, what are you most curious about right now in terms of storytelling?
Story is very, very, very powerful. And so what I'm realizing more and more as I get into this is that most people's wisdom comes from the life experience that they've had. That may seem like an obvious thing, maybe, but they don't know how to tell the story of what they know through the story of what's happened to them.
The story of what you know and the story of what happened to them. So that, you've just divided. I just think of it as one story, right? I'm sure most people do.
Right.
But that is a curious way to separate things, right?
Yeah, well, because you don't realize at the time that that's what you learned. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. You live through something.
As you look back, writing it, then you can say, oh, yeah, that's when I learned that. And it's funny, I've done, close to 80 different books with different people through coaching, or almost all of those, probably 80 just ghostwriting. And everybody has sort of things that they want to teach the world when they want to write a book. That's naturally why you have your 5 reasons for this, or your 12 steps to that, or your 21, leadership things or whatever. But all of those you learned through your life, and you saw the value of them through something you experienced. And so being able to take authors back to connect them to when they learned it, and then use that story as a parable to help them teach what they know, it's just so much more powerful than just kind of unpacking, this is the principle and here it is, and let me explain it, and there you go. And I hope that helps you. But when you help them sit in it through a story, and then you get a chance to unpack it, and then maybe you give like some metaphors or other things to understand it. Your book becomes a lesson in its own. And it's funny how much you can put down on paper and people still want to come, work with you. I mean, it's a know, like, and trust thing. You probably found that with your book, and I think that's the hardest part for most of us that do entrepreneurship, that have some teaching that we want to do, is you feel so salesy when you talk to people up front about, this is what I can offer you, but when they read your book first, they get to know you, like you, and trust you before they've even met you. And by the time you get a chance to meet with them, you don't have to sell them anymore. Plus, they already kind of have a basic understanding, so you can already start to take them deeper. So it's been really interesting, to work with clients on that, especially people who have some kind of a coaching or some kind of a knowledge or experiential, sitting, meditation, different things.
Have you taken on some of those? Obviously, in 80 books, how did you learn the most from? Like, which book did you learn the most from?
Oh, I don't know. I'd have to really think about that. I have to go back. I'd probably have to look at the list, because I don't always remember what I've written. But it was really funny when when we first started out in business, I felt like all I was doing was financial books. And then when our kids were hitting their tweens, all of a sudden we're doing parenting books. So, I feel like God knew what I needed to learn when I needed to learn it. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey that way. I don't know that I've always applied everything as much as I should, but that's kind of the way we
have to
all
ask
go,
your kids. Oh, that's good though. So because obviously the author is the author. You don't get named usually if you're a ghostwriter, right? Nobody knows that you've done this, that you've handheld and, done a lot of the thinking and the writing for someone based on, I guess, the conversations you've had with them or other work that they've worked on.
Well, and even if you get a whiff on a title, they still don't think about you as the person who wrote the book.
No, because the intellectual property and the kind of the ideas that are coming through are primarily the person who's got their name as the author, right?
That's right. And that's the value of the book. It's kind of funny because sometimes speaking, I get tripped up because I'm better on paper. Mm-hmm. And I think the same thing happens to speakers when they start to see what they've written. It can be actually distracting to them. So you've got somebody who's got great ideas, and that's what the book is going to be about. But they maybe don't have that knowledge or the background. I mean, they haven't, you see in my library, if you see be on a podcast, there's all these books behind me. They haven't read all the different books that are on that topic. So when you work with a ghostwriter who's worked in that industry before, they've written in there, they've read widely in that, they know things that they can bring in. Ghostwriters are always kind of nerds for history, so they can bring in a lot of different perspectives. So, there's your personal story, but then history repeats itself. And there's ways to take other examples from other things and other books out there that can also illustrate your book. And so that's what a ghostwriter brings to it. And it's really the job to be totally a ghost, totally invisible, right? Wow. You come in and put them into your brain and then express it to them, but maybe just with a little bit of a literary improvement.
Do you ever feel like you become a therapist to those writers of yours?
When I taught 8th grade, particularly, it was so obvious what the kids were working out as they wrote, what things they were exploring and what they were doing. And I think everyone that works with a ghostwriter comes out with a better understanding of what they know. Because that articulation, because books start with page 1 and they go to page whatever, 150, 200, 400, whatever. And that's a linear presentation of your unique knowledge. Mm-hmm. And for that to communicate to an author, that needs to be, or an audience, that needs to be done in a very particular way. And succeeding in doing that just helps you understand what you know so much better.
What's the main pitfall for someone that wants to find that, you know, it's like a I always think of sometimes it's like having a conversation with someone who's reading. You know what I mean? That you have to anticipate what it is they're going to be thinking of next. But what are the main pitfalls to put making it linear for some of these thought leaders that you work with?
I think the main pitfall is that it doesn't come linearly. You don't start with word one and end on word
You mean
700.
in a person's brain?
Yeah,
It's
no,
not
well,
linear.
even the book doesn't come linear. You know, as you write, I mean, I think the hardest thing for people when they sit down and write is that confidence that what they've got to say is all right,
Mhm.
that it has value. And the problem is with writing is that you've got to write the idea that's in your brain now before you get to the idea that's underneath it, or that gets to the deeper idea, or
Okay.
that gets to the deeper idea. So you don't do one draft. You talk about drafts, right? Well, it's a little bit like designing your house. I think maybe that might be a better way to do it. The architect will come in with ideas for what it could be laid out. And it's like, oh, can you add this? Or can you move this wall? Or you can do this other thing. So there's thousands of iterations of being able to say the right thing.
Mhm.
There's a great quote by Kurt Vonnegut that says, and I'm going to kind of mess it up. He says, writers aren't smart because, they're some intellectual genius. Writers are smart because they're patients. It's like blowing up a dirigible with a hand pump. They just work at it over and over again until they get the right sentence. So, how many times, everybody only sees the last sentence and the way it came out at the end. But there were so many iterations of that. And I call it sentence gymnastics, where you move things around and set it differently to try to find the best expression or the best story or the best whatever. And you have to let yourself go through those iterations and those changes. And that can be a real confidence suck, because you feel like I don't understand this as well as I thought I did. But that ability to get it on paper and stand up and walk away and go for a walk and then be driving in your car or be in your shower, that's the classic, right?
Hmm.
When that idea comes to you crystalline as exactly how it needs to show up on the page, it's the patience to have that people don't realize that they need. Because we don't teach writing as iteration. We really should. We really should spend a lot more time with that.
What do you mean by the
And,
word iteration?
well, iteration is like changing things a little bit all the time, right? So you talk about that when anytime you're inventing something, especially like software people talk about alike, but products are like that too. So think of design, what was it like to design the first iPhone,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to take the examples that they had before, like when I was in high school, cell phones look like bricks, right?
Mm-hmm. That was
You
one
know,
iteration of a cell phone.
yeah, that was the first iteration that we saw of a cell phone, and look at what it is today. Plus the fact that we can do with a cell phone now what a room full of computers couldn't do when they were going to put a man on the moon.
It's crazy.
And to think how many millions of dollars of equipment you would need in 1990 to replace what an iPhone does now. So there's all of those are changes and all of those are improvements. And that's kind of the process with writing. You get to try it again and again and again until you get it right. And that's hard to do in a vacuum, right? Because there's so much self-confidence that needs to do it, which is almost why it's easier for me to write as a ghostwriter than it is to write my own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I get to find somebody else's voice and I know what their genius is. It's always surprising too to talk with an author and tell them what their genius is, because they don't necessarily know that particular deal.
Yeah, so you're looking at it from a completely, fresh eyes. You have in your mind also an idea of what connects with people, like what connects with an audience. And to kind of see someone, to see everything they've currently got and to have them talk to you about what they've got, you can see into them something that they may not see as an obvious, say, unique selling point. Because I mean, that's what every, author really needs, or every book needs, is they needed to have something that makes it a little different from everybody else's version of it, right?
Yeah, and they don't realize what it is through their process.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the best example of that is that we had an author come to us that's just coming back actually to write her second book now. But she coaches people. Her book's called Finding Your Next, and she spells next NXT, because the idea is it's so urgent you don't even have time to write it out
Mm-hmm.
completely. And it's about finding the next big phase of your life, the next big change, the next big development. And she's like, well, I want to coach on this, and I know I have to have a book, right? Because anybody's a thought leader. If you have to have a book to be a thought leader, right? She goes, but I don't have like 5 steps of this or 12 steps of that. I don't really have a method. I just sit down and talk with people. And I said, okay, well, let's meet. Let's get together. We'll come out and pretend like we're your clients, and we'll talk together and figure it out. And as we talked, and she told us about what she did, and she gave us stories about different clients she's worked with and different things, we started hearing the same questions over and over again. So we discovered that she really had this series of questions that she answered throughout her process of coaching somebody, not always in the same order, always unique to their particular take, but the same questions. So I said, well, what if you wrote all your questions down and then answered them? What if that was like your first draft of your book? So she took about a year to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And she had really interesting questions. She had probably 16, 20 questions in the end that did it out. And so I said, okay, now let's look at your life and see, do you have a time in your life where you kind of worked through each of these questions yourself and learned them? Well, she'd sold her business. She'd bought a piece of land in southern Colorado that has a beautiful view, a farm, a ranch, and then they had to build a house on it. And so it turns out everything that she wanted to teach other people, she'd learned in this process of going from a city girl in Boulder, Colorado, owning a big company, selling the company, and then deciding not wanting to retire and just go into obscurity, to when she started her coaching business, which included moving to southern Colorado, buying a ranch, building a house, building a ranch, the whole process. And she could go through each of the questions that she did and illustrate it with something that she'd learned, from like having the first chickens in the place to the first sheep, to whether or not she was going to name her goats, all these different steps that they had to go through, all the little iterations of developing her business.
Mm-hmm.
And we put all those together. We created 3 different threads of the story, the question, and all the things she taught clients to do that. And then in the whole process she's doing that, it's changing the way that she's coaching.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever chapter she's on this week, she's teaching in her book, in her clients, when she's meeting with clients for the weekends, for her immersions that she does.
Wow.
And it's been a great tool for her. She did a workbook for it. She's done an audiobook, and now I think it's maybe 4 or 5 years later, she wants to go back and write book 2.
That's an amazing story. I mean, I love the idea that not only did she discover how she works, she also discovered the history, the backstory, and it led her to also then develop what she's currently doing. And there's a huge amount of value in any aspect of that for anybody. But the thing that I was curious about next was, I know I was curious when you were speaking, because you work with your wife, and I was curious whether you and your wife have a different take on it, that she sees things or you see things that help you to speed this process up, or to bring an extra layer to the process for your clients.
Well, what's fun is when you hire us, we both show up. And we used to joke that we were like Chip and Joanna Gaines.
Mm-hmm.
I guess now I hope everybody still knows who they are. It feels like it's
Yeah, the
almost too
fixer
long
upper.
ago.
So
The
they
fixer
use.
upper guys. Yeah. And so he was the guy that fixed the walls and put in and made sure that the roof stood and added the new room and moved and did the kitchen and did all the construction and set up all the framework. She
Yeah.
was the one that came in and put the pillows on the couch. I guess that's probably a really, really simplified way of doing it, but made the house look good from the inside.
Yeah.
And so I'm more of a structural guy. I'm much more of like, how do you set your book up?
Mm-hmm.
And she's a poet at heart. So the phraseology and the different things to be able to say different words, that comes across. And then we don't tend to work on the same books at the same time. We've done that maybe once. But when we come in and meet with an author, it gives us both perspectives to be able to go. And I can hear her in her when she's talking about this needs to be done, to be thinking in this one, to approach this particular audience.
Mm-hmm.
I can log that. And then there's some authors that just naturally fit more with that poetic need, that they've got a little bit more of a framework already, but they need to say it in an elegant way that's really going to resonate with people and people are going to remember it. I mean, we all know of, maybe we don't always remember them, but we all know of those one quotes, that kind of resonate and stuck with us, that really were meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
And helping people find that for their work that's really a lot of fun.
It is so important that the essence of who you are can come through the words. So I know we're going to have to wrap things up a little bit, but I was talking with someone who's writing a book right now, and she was like, "Oh yes, I put my stuff into AI to proofread it, and it ruined it, right?" Because I think what she was losing was that essence of her, her tone, the order she puts in the words. Sometimes, there's a fine line there, right? Because I mean, I'm sure some people will worry about this, even working with a ghostwriter. How will they find my voice? How will they make it sound like me?
Right. Well, and communicate that soul that is inside of you, that's learned all this, mm-hmm. that has always been with you, that kind of connects to the spiritual world at the same time as you're trying to do things, in the physical world. I mean, that's kind of what AI will never have. And I feel, I know we're rushing to have it. I mean, you can't even open Microsoft Word anymore without it suggesting that you rewrite it. And I know the lazy writer in me feels that same way. It's like, oh, well, that's good enough. Mm-hmm. That's well said. That's good enough. That's taken what I want to do and said it in a certain way. But the most generic way of saying things isn't what you want for your book. And it doesn't express who you are as an individual. Your soul should shine through your words. It should shine through your book so people really know who you are. And a lot of people might discount that. I mean, we live in a very materialistic world that kind of almost denies people even have a soul. And I guess if you feel that way, then AI is a great way to just get a book written. But I just don't know that. I mean, maybe it can make a really, you would know this better than I do. I know that there's been like experiments with like really poppy songs mm-hmm. that they've used AI to create, and they've been popular for a certain time. And I know they're now working with like AI actors and stuff to create a persona and a look and all that stuff. But I just don't think it's going to last.
Mm-hmm. I think it's about discernment. Yeah.
And connection.
Yeah.
That's really what you're looking for, right?
Yeah.
Connection with the experience of the person that you're reading about. I mean, that's why we pick up a memoir.
I love memoirs. I love biographies that feel like they're written from that first person. And there's certain books as well that I feel have a certain energy. And I love spiritual books. I teach mantra meditation, but when I've read Thich Nhat Hanh or I've read Paramahansa Yogananda, it's like you're getting more than just what the words are saying on the page. And I would liken it to the kind of the way that we receive energy from people if we're just in the same room, rubbing shoulders with someone. You rub shoulders with the right people, magical things can happen, right? And I believe that when I listen to, say, an audiobook written or read by the author, that I'm receiving more than just what those words say on the page. So there's definitely layers of connection, like you said, connection, and the connection is something a little bit maybe intangible, or could be something energetic. It's something that you maybe feel like, I like listening to this author, or I don't like listening to this author, or I like reading this particular author and I don't like reading this other author. And we are always in this choice of like, well, which book about, coaching do I pick up today? And we're choosing generally a lot of the time based on our intuition, or maybe it's the cover of the book, or recommendation. And so, but what we need is out there, and we all are striving in some way to evolve, and we all want that connection. We all want to feel someone understands us, that we can move forward in different ways, that we have a helping hand along our journey. And that's what I think the work you're doing is so important, because it's making it very accessible for someone to give that helping hand, and something that they can easily just give to someone that they can read at their own pace and learn from.
Yeah, and it's that resonance that makes that connection. I don't want to dish on AI too much, but I did hear somebody say, I don't want AI to do my writing and my thinking for me so that I can go and do the dishes. I want AI to do the dishes so I can go and do my writing and my thinking. And we're just finding the application for it. I like AI for research, but I have to go read that book then. It's like, oh, this book is on that, and AI found that for me. That's a great help, because I didn't have to go to the library and spend hours researching, but now I know this is a good book, so I can go read it. So it's helpful in those things. So you have to kind of find a place for it, but don't let it be an imposter for you.
Yes. Yeah, we have to look at it and ask ourselves, does it still feel good? Does it still feel like me? So
because that's the value you share. The value you share is you.
Exactly. It's as simple as it's just you, right? And then it's as complicated as it's a process that you do, and it's as complicated as the words that you say. It's a fascinating journey to take someone on that writing journey. What would you say your clients would say, like, about you, about working with you? What is the light bulb thing that they get from you?
Am I too humble to say that? I don't know.
Yeah, don't be humble in this situation. I want to know.
I think they learn about themselves, and it kind of depends on them a little bit. I've even had, people sort of take things that I'd created for them and go speak on them, and then not even really realize that it hadn't originated with them. So it's a better, it's a little bit of more of themselves. If they know themselves better, I hope that's what they can say. They know themselves better, and they know the mission that they're on the earth to accomplish a little bit better, and they're a little bit better equipped to do that, and they're a little bit better equipped to help others do that.
And you give them confidence as well.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so that's the things show up as who they genuinely are that much more clearly and transparently.
I love that.
That they don't have to hide, that they don't really have to hide so much.
Well, that could be a whole nother podcast episode about hiding. Because I think that's huge, that there's a part of us, each of us feels that precious thing within us is going to be at risk if we reveal it. And it's only when you start to reveal it and you realize, hang on, people appreciate this, or it's valuable for me to reveal my hard time that I had with such and such a thing, and that it's helped someone. And you start to realize that actually it's a fuel for a bright fire that can burn, and that can be of something that warms people and, gives them energy and inspires them also then to take a risk and share something about their own life that they might not have shared with anyone before.
Yeah, that vulnerability is really powerful. I mean, I think we see that in the work of Brene Brown. She talks about that kind of power, but to help people do that in their writing and see how to use it and see not how to like you're exposing yourself too much, but do it in a way that's tactful and it helps the other people find the message. It's, it's powerful to see how that changes people and how they realize that they can be vulnerable and people will still love them.
And love them even more.
Yeah, all the more.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to our listeners before we start to wrap things up? Is there anything that you want them to remember from today?
I think the biggest thing I find is that if you feel like you're called to write a book, that you are. And that if you need help with it, that's not an embarrassing thing to do. If you don't have time to do it, that's what a ghostwriter is. If you do have time to do it and you just need like that confidence, that's what a coach is for. And there's people out there that do this all the time, to be able to do that and to get to the end of that process. Because I think probably the biggest mistake we think we do when we're sitting to write a book is we think we have something to teach. But the ones who get out of it the most are the ones who come looking for something to learn. And that learning also helps them be better teachers. So it's a great cycle. And it gets addicting. And I've never been able to escape it, which is probably why I've done 80 some books now. So you just kind of get in.
I mean,
and meet with new people that are so diverse and so crazy.
You're saying some of your clients are crazy? I love it though, because this is the thing. You're giving space for people to be the true part of themselves. And it's those unique, crazy things about ourselves that make for the most interesting books.
It's true. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Resonate podcast today, Rick. It's been an absolute pleasure. It would be, I think anyone listening, it would be an amazing thing to get the chance to work with you. And I love this idea, just to reiterate, another iterate word, to reiterate this idea that it is a learning process for the author, that it is something that's going to teach you something, and starting with curiosity about your subject matter and your journey, and to be open to evolving through that process means that it's so valuable to just start that journey. And I think any journey, and because I work as a voice coach and myself, any journey is easier when you have someone walking along with you, even if it's just for a few steps here and there.
Oh, definitely,
but, yeah, like we're not really meant to do these big things completely alone. We need each other.
Pretty sure we're not meant to do anything alone, but that's a conversation as well.
Yeah, for the next time. Thank you so much, Rick. And I'd love to meet Melissa at some point. It sounds like you guys have an amazing partnership. And I think that's in itself a very inspiring thing. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me. You're always such a light. It's always such a great opportunity to connect with you and hear what you're up to. So
thank you. And to everyone listening, if you're interested in writing a book, you got to get started and let me or Rick know what you're up to, because we would love to be your support along the way. Thank you all. This is Aideen again. We'll see you on the next episode of the Resonate podcast. Bye-bye.